On banking, part 1. It is not by augmenting the capital of the country, but by rendering a greater part of that capital active and productive than one would otherwise be so, that the most judicious operations of banking can increase the industry of the country. This is taken from The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, very famous book. We can say for sure that the operations of the local banks do not now increase or optimize the industry in the country. Currently, and this has been so for many years now, the country has had an abundance of liquidity in that there are billions of TT dollars lying in the banks, unable to attract investors. Treasury bills and notes remove this excess liquidity on an ongoing basis so that interest rates do not fall below certain levels. These banks and other finance houses are flush with cash, which do not find its way to many needful projects in the community, so hence a dichotomy. There is an obvious need for the funding of several projects throughout the country, and there are several billion TT dollars available for use, but unable to reach these projects, and no one seems to know why or how to bring about this funding. We shall be taking a very close look at banking, its function and particular function in any society. We shall first look at the history of banking, which is really the history of the use of money, paper money. 400 years ago, trading in goods and services between persons was facilitated by bartering. Goods were exchanged for goods and services for services. This proved to be very inconvenient and cumbersome, as this system did not allow for the acquisition of all that one needed or desired, as some goods were not universally needed, and one had an excess of any item. It became very difficult to trade. Eventually, gold was seen universally as a precious enough substance that could be traded for any good or service, and was accepted as such. In due course, goldsmiths, and only a trusted few, were deemed suitable for safekeeping and storing the excess gold in the community, because they had the means to make bits or coins for trading purposes, as well as the vaults for safekeeping the precious metal. There were a lot of snipping of these gold coins, which was essentially taking small pieces of gold off each coin. And this was deemed to be simply dishonest, and goldsmiths who were found doing this were seen as untrustworthy, so that only a few were seen as trustworthy bankers of the precious metal. So the merchants and traders simply left their gold with their trusted goldsmith bankers, and instead of taking it out to make payments, they simply told the other party to go to their goldsmith or bank for the gold money. They would have also given the party a letter or note to Smith, and this is probably the way check payments started. These notes or letters would have included the words "promises to pay bearer on demand," and this was of course backed by the gold had in the vault. The goldsmiths having developed impeccable reputations, no one would have questioned whether the gold was in fact saved in their vaults, so that notes over time were converted into paper money for use by all and sundry, with the general acceptance that this new currency was backed by the gold in the vaults. So this is how goldsmiths became bankers. Instead of exchanging these notes for gold, they simply used the notes as further legal tender, and with several such goldsmiths now operating in the community, these notes were now deposited and thereafter used as exchange between banks and became the common currency of doing business throughout the country. Over time, it was found that the gold simply stayed in the vaults and was duly forgotten, as trading and exchange took place exclusively with these notes. The bankers found that they could move more notes than was backed by gold, and hence the advent of offering loans to businessmen and customers of the bank was formed. These loans became very popular and were mainly responsible for catapulting the agricultural and industrial revolutions in the 17th and 18th centuries. Notes were loaned for the purpose of new machinery for the iron foundries. Those persons seeking these loans would have had to put up security of some sort because, remember, the paper was not backed by any gold whatsoever. Most of the security taken was in the form of property, essential properties on lands of high value, essentially properties of lands of high value. If these ventures failed, the properties would then be forfeited in lieu of the loan repayment. Over time, high-valued properties were seen as excellent security, and the risk of financing ventures were deemed minimal, as the properties could be sold off for sums far greater than the value of the coins, than the value of the loans. The asset base of banks became very large indeed, and to this day, banks have shown a propensity for making loans available to the wealthy rather than the ordinary working man, and hence Adam Smith's statement, given at the start of the chapter, have never really been subscribed to by banks over their existence. Because wealthier folk have had greater access to bank funds, this is one reason why the gaps between rich and poor have always been wide and is continuing to get wider. Notwithstanding this culture of conservatism that had been the culture of bankers over the years, within recent times, over the past 30 to 40 years, there has been the practice now to engage in what is called risky lending. Many developing countries have been the beneficiaries of large loan funding for very grandiose and risky projects. With oil windfalls being accrued in the 80s and 90s, banks had sought to lend developing countries billions of dollars for projects that were not carefully audited, in the belief that the loans could be easily repaid by increasing taxes on the populations. What happened instead was that the inevitable boom and bust cycles occurred, with the result that many countries could not repay when their economies collapsed, and those projects invested therein suddenly became unbankable. In 2008-2009, the latest worldwide recession was precipitated by banks doing business with other banks between Western Europe and North America, selling to each other mortgage instruments that were not really bankable. Many banking and finance houses were rendered insolvent, as many of the products bought and sold were not worth the paper they were written on, and many of these institutions were being deemed too big to fail, were rescued by the taxpayers of their countries. Many large holders of stock in the major stock exchanges on either continent lost their holdings and their life savings, and those stock markets lost at least half of their values, which would have brought the world to the brink of another Great Depression. This was only avoided when governments decided to print money and pump same into their economies, in the belief that enough money would be available to service the economies. This then is the situation today. Money is being circulated that is not backed by the production of goods and services. When this happens, we are sure to have inflation and the devaluation and debasement of the currency. When valuable land is unemployed or underemployed, a similar effect is had, because of the imbalance of the factors of production. What then should be the true role of banks in a society that wishes to optimize its development? What do bankers do in the community? Banks essentially take deposits from individuals, corporate citizens, the state, through its many corporations, ministries, and departments, and even foreign individuals and enterprises. They then lend this capital out at lending rates, which turn a profit for its shareholders, but the service is only made available to those persons who are deemed to have qualified. Many of the ordinary folk who put their savings in do not meet the qualifications. So this will be continued in banking part 2, to be continued in banking part 2. Of course, you can get more on this subject by accessing our flagship course, whose link is in the description, profile, bio. Thank you.